The ice in my glass melted slower than I expected. That's the first thing I remember. Not the jazz band. Not the skyline. Not even the fact that I was the only one at the bar not wearing a name tag. Just the sound of melting ice. Drip, drip, drip. Like a countdown. I didn't plan to drink that night. But the moment I walked into the party and saw the way the room bent around her boss, I knew I wasn't staying sober. Every conversation seemed to orbit him like he was the sun, and everyone else was desperate for warmth. There was this woman in a silver dress flirting with the saxophone player. Two men in velvet jackets comparing watches. Someone nearby kept laughing at all the wrong times, like they'd practiced and forgot the rhythm. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just stood there with my drink, tracking her with my eyes while pretending not to. She was drifting between conversations like a candle in water, smiling too much, touching too often, always making sure he was watching. And he was. Every single time. You ever see two people communicate without speaking? That was them. So I waited. I waited long enough to finish my drink. Long enough to watch the ice turn to water. Long enough to know that if I blinked, I'd miss something irreversible. And then it happened. They thought no one saw them slip away from the group. They were wrong. I followed. Quietly. Calmly. Like I was heading to the bathroom. Like I hadn't just watched my marriage unzip itself at the seams. The rooftop had this semi-private area tucked behind a row of space heaters, cushioned benches, string lights, a view of the Hudson like something from a movie. That's where I found them. He was seated, legs spread like he owned the entire city, arms lazily draped across the back of the bench. She was on his lap, not straddling, not even facing him, just sitting, like she'd done it before. Her head tilted back in laughter, his fingers tracing circles on her knee. I didn't walk away. I didn't say her name. I didn't even breathe too loud. I just stepped forward until the heater lit up my face, and they both froze, like statues caught mid-crime. She blinked like she was seeing a ghost. He didn't flinch. Wrong seat. I said, calm as glass. She started to stand, stammer something about too much wine. He didn't let her move. His hand stayed. I smiled. And what I said next made him turn pale and her knees buckle. But you'll have to wait for that. Because what I knew, what I brought with me that night, wasn't just suspicion. It was evidence. And once I dropped it, neither of them would ever sit comfortably again. He didn't blink when I stepped into the heater's light. Didn't move his hand. Didn't even have the decency to pretend he was surprised. Just leaned back like nothing was out of place. Like this was all part of some script he'd run before. My wife, on the other hand, looked like someone had pulled the gravity out from under her. Her body tensed, half rising, half rooted to his lap, unsure which betrayal to commit first, staying or fleeing. I brought something for you, I said, pulling the envelope from inside my coat pocket. Philip, because of course it was Philip, finally raised an eyebrow. Not because he felt threatened. No, this was amusement. Like I'd brought a strongly worded letter to a chess match he already thought he'd won. Justine's voice cracked first. Frank, I didn't know you were here already. You didn't check, I replied, offering the envelope to her boss instead of her. You didn't think I would show up. He took it, hesitated for a second, then opened it casually, like he expected a resignation letter or maybe some pitiful ultimatum. Inside was a stack of photos. Printed, glossy, sharp. Not of them, yet, but of her car, parked outside his condo. 3 nights this month. Of hotel charges on our joint credit card that she'd marked as client strategy dinners. Of a phone log showing 38 calls to his number in the past 2 weeks, half of them after midnight. And at the bottom, a copy of her signed employment contract. Highlighted was one particular clause, the one about non-fraternization with superiors in leadership roles, which could result in immediate termination without severance if breached. His smirk twitched. Just barely. Justine finally stood up, her voice frantic and rehearsed all at once. What are you doing? What is this? You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said quietly, loud enough for both of them to hear, but not enough to draw attention. No, Justine. I'm doing exactly what you taught me. Documentation. Evidence. Control. Philip had gone silent. He wasn't looking at her anymore. Just at the paper in his hands. The words he'd likely helped write into her contract. The terms that now stared back at him like a weapon. I didn't come here to make a scene, I added. But if I leave with these still in your hands, I will file a formal complaint with HR by Monday. You'll be under investigation before lunch. Your board will hear about it by Friday. And I know, Philip, I know you're up for a regional promotion next quarter. His knuckles whitened just slightly. That's when I saw it. That flicker in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of consequence. The one thing men like him always believe they're immune to. My wife stepped forward. Frank, please. We didn't. You didn't what? I asked. Mean for me to find out? Or mean for it to get serious? She said nothing. I turned back to her boss. You have 10 seconds to apologize. Out loud. For disrespecting me, for breaking your own contract, and for dragging my wife into something she was too blind to see coming. You can apologize, or you can explain all of this to your legal department on Monday. The silence between us burned hotter than the heater beside me. 8 seconds in, he stood up. I'm sorry, Philip said, voice low, clenched. It was a mistake. Louder, I said. He looked around. He wasn't just afraid now. He was calculating. He knew if this became public, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a liability. I'm sorry, he said again, this time clearly. It was a lapse in judgment. It won't happen again. Good, I said, taking the envelope back. Now sit down, and let's enjoy the rest of the party like professionals. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't look at Justine. Not yet. That part would come later. There were more layers to peel back, more truths to expose. Because as it turns out, that contract wasn't the only thing she signed behind my back. 2 days after the party, I found a charge on our joint account that didn't match any of our known bills. Wexford U-Store, $159.00. Justine had labeled it under utilities. That would have worked if I hadn't known our gas and electric were bundled. And we don't use storage. At least I didn't. At first, I thought it might have been something innocent. Maybe she was hiding birthday gifts or some old furniture from her mother's place. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. Not after what I saw on that rooftop. Not after the fake apologies and Philip's calculated surrender. Something was off. Something had been off for months. I just hadn't known where to look. So the next morning, while she was at a strategy alignment lunch, her words, I drove to the Wexford facility. It was a rundown place off a service road, tucked between a shut-down mattress outlet and an abandoned strip mall. The office smelled like coffee that had been burned twice, and the receptionist didn't even ask for ID when I told her my wife's name. She slid me a clipboard and pointed me toward Unit 119, second row on the left. I still don't know what I expected. A box of old shoes? Maybe some boxes from her college years? What I found instead was a double life neatly packed into corrugated walls and plastic bins. There was a foldable mattress, a few designer dresses on rolling racks, a duffel bag with men's clothes in it, sizes that didn't fit me, cologne I didn't recognize, a cooler with 3 melted wine bottles inside. And in the back, still in its supermarket box, was a frozen chocolate cake with the words, "You're my only real thing," scribbled in pink across the top. It was expired. By 2 months. I stood there for almost an hour. I didn't touch anything. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood. Like I was at an art exhibit I didn't understand. Because what kind of person has a secret storage unit with a mattress and birthday cake for someone who isn't their husband? There was also a safe. One of those cheap fireproof boxes you can get at any office store. I wasn't proud of what I did next. But I did it. I drove home, waited until she got in the shower that night, then faked a migraine and went back out. I knew she kept the spare keys in her makeup drawer, tucked between concealer kits she didn't know I'd snooped through before. I returned to the unit after dark. Pried open the box with a crowbar I borrowed from my neighbor, telling him I'd locked myself out of the shed. Inside that safe were documents. A different lease agreement. Not in our town. Not even in our county. A short-term rental in White Plains. Furnished. Paid in cash. 6 months ago. There were receipts too. Flights I never heard about. Spa appointments charged to a card I didn't know she had. A Polaroid photo of Justine, in the same green dress she wore the night of the party, sitting on a balcony I'd never seen. Her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking just left of it. Smiling. Like someone was making her laugh. I don't know why that broke me more than the lap sitting, or the lies, or the cold apology. But it did. I sat down on the damn mattress. In that concrete box. With the smell of expired wine and freezer-burned cake, and I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just cheating. This was a second life. A duplicate. A version of her I'd never been invited to know. And the man who shared that version with her? He wasn't Philip. That was the part that really shattered everything. Because if it wasn't her boss, then who the hell was it? For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. I kept replaying that Polaroid in my head, zooming in on her smile, the curve of her shoulder, the glass of wine in her hand, the faint reflection in the window behind her. I had placed it on our dining room table, alone, unframed, and face up, like a threat or an offering. I wasn't sure which. Justine didn't even notice it when she sat down across from me the next morning. Or maybe she did and decided to pretend she didn't. She was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows an argument. This was curated silence. Professional. Engineered. I'd seen it in client calls she used to do from the living room. The silence that means, I know something you don't, and I'm giving you a chance to bury it before I expose you. I waited until Friday to do something about it. I went to the address listed on the lease I found in the storage unit. A second-floor unit in a newly renovated brick apartment building on a quiet street in White Plains. It had potted plants on every balcony and little welcome mats with punish sayings like, "Why not?" and "Home is where the Wi-Fi connects." I stood across the street and watched for over an hour. Nobody went in. Nobody came out. Curtains stayed drawn. Lights off. No sign of life. So I walked around the block and stepped into the first business I saw, a mid-range Italian place called Capri Vento. It had that over-designed bistro look, string lights, fake brick wallpaper, a playlist of instrumental covers of pop songs. I was going to just get a coffee, maybe ask a question or two casually, but before I even opened my mouth, the hostess said, "Hey, you're Justine's husband, right, Franklin?" My stomach flipped so fast I nearly dropped my phone. I gave the kind of nod you give when you're not sure whether to lie or run. "She left her scarf here like 2 weeks ago," the hostess added, walking toward the coat rack behind the podium. "She usually comes in on Thursdays. You're not the one who orders the veal marsala with no mushrooms, are you?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "that's not me." "Oh, right. That's her friend. Tall guy, always brings his own bottle of red. Quiet." I could feel every nerve ending in my fingers start to fire off like alarms. "Did they come in last night?" The hostess hesitated. "Just for a second." "No," she said slowly. "But I think I saw him Tuesday. Alone though. Just takeout." "Do you remember his name?" "I don't think he ever gave it," she said, shrugging. "But he always pays cash." "Cash?" Of course he did. I thanked her, took the scarf even though I didn't want it, and walked outside feeling like I had swallowed a lead weight. There was a pattern here, a routine, a whole rhythm that I had been cut out of, while some stranger had been given access to the version of my wife who smiled differently, who laughed with her eyes, who had a favorite dish and forgot scarves like she lived in a rom-com. That night, I searched everything. Her old photos, her tagged pictures on social media, emails, travel itineraries. I didn't know what I was looking for until I found it. A calendar invite buried deep in her archived Gmail folders titled CL, Dinner at CV. There were 3 of them, all from a year ago. CL. I didn't know what it stood for. A name? A code? A company? I couldn't let it go. It stayed stuck in my head like a splinter under the skin. So I did what any man losing his grip does. I went back to the restaurant. I waited in my car on Thursday. I parked across from the entrance, bought a sandwich I didn't eat, and let the evening pass in slow motion. And then, just after 8 p.m., a man stepped out of a black sedan with tinted windows and walked straight through the restaurant doors like he owned the place. Tall, gray coat, confident gait, familiar somehow, but I couldn't place him. He didn't look around, didn't check his phone. He just walked to the back, where the booths were more private. 10 minutes later, Justine arrived. Not hurried, not sneaky, relaxed. She kissed him on the cheek. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't storm in or start screaming. I just sat there, watching, and all I could think was, how many versions of my wife are there? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in bed next to her while she texted someone under the covers, pretending it was work, fingers moving in a rhythm that didn't match any corporate emergency. She was smiling into the screen, trying not to, but I saw it in the twitch at the corner of her mouth. I pretended to snore. That's how bad it had gotten. I faked sleep to avoid the responsibility of confronting my own marriage. But the next morning, while she was brushing her teeth and humming some careless pop song, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. It was locked. Of course. It had been unlocked for years. Now it wasn't. That change said more than any password ever could. I knew I had a small window of time before she took the phone with her into the shower. So I grabbed my keys, took the scarf I'd gotten back from the hostess at Capri Vinto, and left. No note. No explanation. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to meet him. It took me 4 hours and 3 phone calls to get the reservation. See, he had used a name when he called for pickup that Tuesday, the night the hostess said he came in alone. I only remembered because she said it so casually, like she assumed I already knew. Pick up for Carter, she had said. He always pays cash. That was the key. Carter. The name didn't ring any bells at first, but once I knew what to look for, it kept showing up in small, hidden ways. A saved contact in Justine's email from last year under Client CL. A Venmo transaction labeled Dog Sitter from someone named Carter W. A photo I missed from 2 summers ago. Her smiling on a boat I didn't recognize, holding a glass of wine with the caption, "One of those CL kind of days." C.L. Carter Langford. I found his LinkedIn. VP of some property group in Manhattan. Very private. Barely any photos. But in one of the real estate press articles about a luxury building opening in Tribeca, there he was, shaking hands with investors. Same gray coat. Same dead eyes. I booked a tour at one of his properties using a burner email. Said I was scouting for investment. It was a long shot, but it worked. They offered me a 30-minute tour with one of their executives. I asked for Carter Langford directly. Said I'd heard good things and wanted to speak with the man himself. I used a voice that didn't belong to me. Firmer, wealthier, interested in high rises. They scheduled the meeting for Friday at 3:15. I arrived 15 minutes early and walked into a glass lobby, so polished I could see the fear in my face reflected back at me. A concierge offered me lemon water. I declined. I wasn't there for hydration. I was there for truth. Carter Langford was taller than I expected. Clean-shaven. Confident. The kind of man who didn't just walk into a room. He made the room rearrange itself around him. His handshake was too strong. His smile too precise. But when he saw my face and heard my name, something shifted. Franklin Weiler, I said, watching the name land like a stone in a quiet lake. His brow tightened slightly. Just for a moment. Enough. I didn't mention Justine. I didn't bring up Capri Vinto. I asked generic questions about the real estate market, nodded at terms I didn't fully understand, and let him build comfort. I was just another guy with money. Or so he thought. Then, at the end, when the tour was wrapping up and he offered to email me the floor plans, I said casually, "Oh, and tell Justine I said hi." I let the sentence hang in the air. I wanted to see how he'd handle it. He paused. Then he smiled. That same exact smile Philip had at the rooftop party. The one that said, "Oh, so you figured it out. What now?" But he didn't say anything. He just nodded. "Will do." And that was the moment I knew. She hadn't just betrayed me with her boss. She had a pattern. She had a type. She was cheating on me with men who thought they were invincible. And now she'd made the mistake of choosing 2 of them at once. So I went home and waited. Because if you corner a predator like her, she bites. But if you let her keep thinking she's hunting, she steps right into the trap. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a marriage when both people are pretending. It's heavier than a fight, thicker than anger. It's the sound of 2 people rehearsing lies to each other, day after day, while smiling through gritted teeth. By the time Saturday came around, Justine was walking on air. I could see it in the way she swayed around the kitchen, humming to herself as she made toast she never ate. She was glowing, and not in the guilty, anxious way I'd been expecting. No, this was worse. She was relaxed, proud even, like she'd pulled off something clever. I knew the look. It was the same one she wore when she beat her department's Q4 projections by 20% 2 years ago and celebrated with a weekend in Miami, solo. So I gave her a gift. I gave her the one thing every liar wants most, a sense of security. "Oh hey," I said casually over coffee, "I'll be working late Monday. There's a board meeting rescheduled last minute." She didn't look up right away. That's how I knew she was listening carefully. She took her time responding, sipping her coffee like it was just another morning. "That's fine," she said, her tone perfectly even. "Actually, I have a client dinner that night anyway. Might work out better this way." And there it was. The opening. I gave her a slight nod and returned to my phone, pretending to scroll through email while my heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. She thought she'd just won something. She thought I'd given her space to continue whatever double life she'd built between late-night texts and cash-only dinners. But what I had actually given her was rope, and she didn't hesitate to wrap it around her own neck. What she didn't know was that I'd already hired someone, a man named Cal Becker, former NYPD, now a private investigator with 30 years of quiet, discreet work behind him. I found him through a friend of a friend, paid him in person, and gave him everything I had. Carter's name, the storage unit address, the White Plains condo, the photos, the restaurant info, and Justine's entire known routine down to her gym schedule and hair appointments. "Do you want her followed, or do you want her caught?" he asked during our first meeting. "Both," I said, but in that order. So when Monday rolled around, I left the house in a full suit, briefcase and all. I kissed her on the cheek, told her I'd be back late, and even added a fake groan about how tedious budget reviews had become. She smiled, gave me a peck that barely brushed my face, and said, "Good luck." It was almost sweet. I drove 2 blocks, parked, changed clothes in the back seat, and made my way to the Café Cal, and I had chosen for surveillance staging. It was across from the restaurant where Justine had been meeting Carter, and tonight, according to the message she'd sent him 3 nights ago, she had told him she'd be free all night, no interruptions. Cal was already waiting when I arrived. He handed me a small earpiece and gestured toward his laptop, where a grainy camera feed showed the restaurant entrance. He didn't talk much. I respected that. He pointed once at the screen when she arrived. Hair curled, lipstick too dark, wearing the same coat she'd worn the night she first met my parents. She was early. She always was when it mattered. Carter arrived 13 minutes later. No hug this time. Just a subtle nod. I could see it already. Things were starting to fray. This wasn't excitement. It was negotiation. Strategy. There was tension between them now, and I had a feeling I knew why. Cal leaned in. "You want audio?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not tonight." I didn't need to hear their lies. I needed to see what they did when they thought no one was watching. For the next 2 hours, I sat there, watching. She touched his arm too much. He checked his phone often. She laughed even when he didn't speak. He barely smiled. There was something off. She was working to keep his attention. Something had shifted. At one point, she reached into her purse and slid something across the table. Cal zoomed in. It was a small velvet box. My stomach twisted. "Don't jump to conclusions," Cal said quietly. "Could be earrings." But I knew better. I'd seen that box before. It was the one she made me return after our anniversary last year, because she didn't like the shade of gold. I watched Carter open it. He closed it quickly, tucked it into his coat, and stood up. Justine's smile faded for the first time all evening. He didn't kiss her, didn't say goodbye. He just left. She sat there for 12 full minutes after he walked out, drinking the wine he didn't finish, trying not to look like someone who had just been dismissed. And that's when I knew, whatever she had with Philip was over. And Carter? He was slipping away too. She was losing control. She just didn't know yet that I'd already taken it from her. Because that velvet box? It wasn't empty. I'd made sure of it. The velvet box wasn't an afterthought. It was the centerpiece. I'd placed the item inside with trembling hands, sweating not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what it represented. It wasn't jewelry, not a ring, not some passive-aggressive trinket meant to jog a guilty conscience. It was a flash drive, matte black, no logo, unlabeled, just heavy enough to make someone curious and silent enough to make someone sweat. On it was a curated selection, screenshots, timestamps, photos, a copy of the lease from the White Plains condo, a cropped photo of Carter and Justine's hands, close, touching, pulled from a larger image at Capri Vento, a list of phone records, one video clip of Justine sitting in the front seat of Carter's car, unbuttoning her coat with a smirk. She never looked at the camera. She never knew the camera was there. And then, at the very end of the drive, a scanned image of the notarized form I'd filed last week. The revocation of her legal access to our shared trust. A clause we both signed in good faith 7 years ago. The one that gave either spouse control over the emergency fund if infidelity could be proven through material evidence. She probably forgot about it. She likely never expected I'd remember. But I did, and I invoked it. By the time Carter opened that velvet box, he would have seen everything. He would know she lied about being separated. He would know the property she claimed was hers belonged to both of us. He would know the lease she showed him was paid with my money, and the lawyer she said she had on standby didn't exist. And based on the way he got up from that table and left her sitting alone like a placeholder, it worked. I didn't need to destroy her with noise. I just had to show him silence wrapped in proof. But the fallout? That came fast. Faster than I thought. 2 days later, she came home late. Not slightly late. Not the kind that could be explained by traffic or meetings running long, but suspiciously late. Red-eyed. Quiet. Her heels clicked too loud on the tile, and her phone was gripped like a weapon. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read, but I wasn't looking at the book. I was watching her. She poured herself a glass of wine, white, unusually, and leaned against the counter. No makeup, hair loose. She didn't even say hello. I waited. You didn't happen to talk to Philip recently, did you? She asked. There it was. The opening shot. I didn't look up. No. Why? He's been distant. And someone's been calling HR about him. There's an internal audit happening now. Just seems weird, that's all. Strange, I said. Could be anyone. She stared at me for a long time after that. Like she wanted to ask something else, but couldn't risk hearing the answer. Then she smiled, soft, desperate, and pivoted like nothing had happened. That's when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. Mr. Weiler? A voice asked. Male. Calm. This is Carter Langford. Justine froze. Her spine visibly tensed. I didn't put him on speaker. I didn't have to. The room went cold anyway. I'm calling as a courtesy, he continued. I received the material. I've ended all communication with your wife. I assume this means you're proceeding with legal action? I haven't decided yet, I said slowly. He exhaled. If it matters, I didn't know. About the trust. Or the marriage. I was told you were done. She said you were staying together for tax reasons. I believed her. That's on me. It is, I said. She dropped by my office earlier today. Tried to talk her way back in. Said you were lying. Said you had fabricated it all. Did you believe her? He paused. Not this time. And then he hung up. I looked at Justine. She was standing there with the glass half lifted, her knuckles pale around the stem. You told him I was your roommate? I asked, voice steady. She didn't deny it. Not out loud. But her face said everything. Frank, she began, eyes wide. I didn't. I held up a hand. And then, very slowly, I reached into the drawer beside me, pulled out the envelope I had prepared days ago, and placed it on the kitchen island. Inside was a list of finalized financial transfers. Bank access revoked. Shared accounts frozen. Legal separation paperwork filed. A note from my attorney confirming the activation of the infidelity clause and the forfeiture of her claim to our shared emergency fund. You dropped the glass the first time, I said, gesturing at her trembling hand. Let's see if you can hold on to it now. She didn't. It shattered against the tile before she even realized she'd let go. The day after the glass shattered, Justine didn't go to work. She didn't speak much either. She moved through the house like a ghost, slow, quiet, cautious, as if anything she said might detonate the last fragments of the life she was still trying to pretend wasn't ending. Her confidence had been replaced by calculation, but her hands still trembled when she poured coffee. That told me more than any apology ever could. She didn't deny anything anymore. She didn't accuse. She didn't deflect. The woman who once ran boardrooms and manipulated two powerful men into orbiting her like planets now sat at the edge of our bed, staring at the floor like a child waiting to be punished. But I wasn't interested in punishing her. Not anymore. That part of me, the man desperate for her validation, for her confessions, for her guilt, he was gone. Something in me had finally unlatched. Quietly. Completely. The next afternoon, she made her move. I could give it all back, she said softly, setting her phone on the kitchen table. Everything you froze. I'll sign whatever you want. We can fix this. We can start over. I let the silence hang. I let her twist in it. You're not sorry for what you did, I finally said. You're sorry it stopped working. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't believe them. Not anymore. Not after what I'd seen. The storage unit, the other man, the lies that ran so deep they had leases and reservations tied to them. You built an entire second life, Justine, I added. One where I didn't exist. You don't fix that. You end it. She tried again. Please, don't let it all go like this. We've been through so much. You still know me better than anyone. No, I said. I just watched you longer than anyone else. I stood up, handed her a plain envelope, and walked out before she could open it. Inside was the final gift. An invitation. To my going-away dinner. Not a date. Not a second chance. A farewell. I had booked a table at a quiet little place 2 towns over. Not fancy, but meaningful. It was the same restaurant where, years ago, I had taken her on our third date and told her about my dreams of publishing a book on forgotten American war heroes. Back when she still listened. Back when I still believed she cared. But this time, the reservation wasn't for 2. It was for 4. I sent one invitation to Justine, the second to Philip, the third to Carter. The fourth was mine. They all showed up, one by one. None of them knew the others had been invited. I watched from a separate table across the room, behind a half-wall divider and a decorative planter. I had spoken to the manager beforehand, paid cash, tipped well, and asked for one favor. Bring them water, menus, and say nothing else. Let them sit in the tension. Let them wait. I stayed just long enough to watch their expressions. Justine arrived first, nervous, clutching her purse like it held the last shreds of her dignity. Philip came next. When he saw her, his jaw clenched, but he sat anyway, silent. Then Carter. He froze when he saw both of them, but sat too, stiff and bitter. None of them spoke. They just sat. 3 people who once thought they held the strings, now tangled in each other's lies, exposed under soft pendant lighting, facing the wreckage they'd all helped build. I left before they noticed me. I didn't need to say anything. That dinner wasn't for me. It was for them. A closing act in a play they didn't even know they were performing. I drove 6 hours north that night. Checked into a quiet cabin near Lake Placid. Alone. No noise. No fake apologies. No curated silence. Just the sound of wind and water. That's where I finally opened the file I'd been too afraid to touch. The one that had sat in my inbox for months. A draft manuscript of my book. The one I had abandoned when things started to crumble. I read the opening chapter again. I smiled. And then I wrote. For the first time in years, I wrote freely. No wait. No lies. Just truth. I don't know what comes next. But I know what doesn't. And that's more than enough for now.